Hello, and welcome to Change the Face of Yoga, teaching toddlers through golden oldies. I'm very excited to be talking to lots of yoga teachers who will explain their passion for teaching yoga to students with different ages, physical fitness levels, wellness levels, and different goals. They will explain the benefits of yoga for these students and will be including teacher tips and pose modifications. I am Stephanie Cunningham of Yoga Lightness, and I've been teaching over 50s for 10 years. So this area is my passion and the passion of many other yoga teachers that you will be listening to in this series. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get started. This is episode 49 of Changing the Face of Yoga, and I'm interviewing Courtney Kilian today. And Courtney has a very interesting way of teaching yoga. She has two main student groups. One is writers or creatives who use yoga to help them with their blocks to their creativity. And she has a whole course on that. And then the second one is she is providing a course for people who have migraines. And I think you'll find what she has to say very interesting and probably pretty unique. So let's listen. Hello, this is Stephanie Cunningham with Changing the Face of Yoga. And I have a very interesting guest today, Courtney Kilian. Courtney is a gentle yoga teacher, and she's the founder of Om and Inc. Live, Breathe, Write, which offers inspirational and embodied classes for writers, those with migraines, and anyone seeking therapeutic release through yoga and writing. She received her MFA in creative writing at the University of California, San Diego, and has trained in gentle yoga, yoga for brain injury, and yoga for trauma and stress. And she loves working with others to inspire their creativity, deepen their intuition, and use writing and yoga as a therapeutic practice. Welcome, Courtney. And is there anything else you'd like to add to that introduction?
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I think we're going to have fun. Okay. Now, I'm a little fascinated and a bit confused about how you're putting these two kind of different, in my experience, things together, which is yoga and writing. And so I know that you're putting together a 6-week online course that uses those two things. And could you, first of all, explain why you think those two things go together so well?
Sure. My background is in creative writing, and I've always loved yoga and body things. And so to just start simply, there are two things that I'm passionate about. But I started noticing that they began to feed each other. My yoga practice was influencing the writing was influencing the yoga practice. And I think that they go together because they're both opportunities to be creative and organic, and they're opportunities to get to know ourselves. And they're both super therapeutic. The act of writing, and I make sure I have the students write by hand because it's so important to use the physical body to produce something creative versus the computer, which is fine in later drafts when we write more. But for that initial creative process, you want more parts of the brain firing so that you're using the physical body. And the yoga feeds into giving us a freedom in the body. And so when we go to the mat and we're willing to breathe and be with the self and understand the self and give ourselves permission to release things, really cool things happen in our writing then. It really opens up our creativity.
So you found this in yourself first, that by using yoga and writing together, you were opening up your creativity. And so then you've taken it to other people. And you said you've done this in California and Utah in the United States and
Yes.
privately. And so what are they finding happening when they do yoga and writing together?
I've had feedback that people that felt really stuck creatively took the classes and really were able to open up. I had one woman, a really cool description of her experience, that in the beginning, she she felt like she couldn't do the poses or open up as deeply as she wanted. She needed to kind of restrict herself and start with small stretches, kind of like she was sticky almost. And she said she felt like that was the same energy that was holding her back from her creative practice. And that when we went through the exercises and when we paired the things together, she started to open and open and open. And we really look at the chakras and moving through the chakras. And the first one we work with is the heart, because you need to open that heart center and be free. I think a lot of writers and people who are creative in general are putting energy into art. We think of it as a luxury, as something that's an indulgence. And so there's so many other more important things to be doing. Well, I can't sit down and have time to write a story or a poem or paint a picture because there's other things that are more important. So it's getting the body to release all these things that we're holding, to open up, to relax, to find freedom. And then we start finding freedom on the page in our words. We're not worried about a final product or an audience. It's just about opening and starting that initial process to really be vulnerable and create something authentic and be in the moment to do that. And that's what yoga gives us.
I can understand that. I am an amateur painter, and everything else seems more important than actually sitting down. I'm always impressed with people who can just sit down and do the creative work every day, right? Because I always find an excuse not to. So I really can understand that. That's great. Now, you also say that meditation helps with this process and breathing. And can you kind of elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. I mean, we use, I like to use meditation in a couple different ways in the classes. Initially, we use it as just a process of arriving, and that the creative process and our practice of yoga, they're both sacred. And so there needs to be some sort of bridge to moving into that. And how do you create that container and how do you create that space? And I see that happening with the breath and settling in, meditation, and just beginning to connect with the body. We also do a lot of meditation that is visuals and leading the students and the artists on a journey within themselves that opens up things. So things that might be standing in their way or things that appear that enter their writing or allow them some sort of release. And of course, meditation, and mindfulness, it's all about the present moment. And I don't think that could be more important for someone who's interested in creating things. I think too often when we want to paint or we want to write something, there's a lot more, it becomes a lot more complicated. The mind's a complicated place. And it's easy for that monkey mind to take over and think about, well, am I going to have a final product? Who's going to read that product? What's the audience going to be like? And to think about all these details and work yourself up with it, that in the beginning, they don't matter. And when we learn to strip away those details and tune into the body, then those experiences translate to the page better. So then the reader has a better experience. And we're just in the moment creating. It's not a worry of a final product.
You're saying that what can be stifling to creativity is worrying about who's going to read it and how they're going to accept it and all of that, whereas yoga teaches you to just create and not worry about the end product.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's all about being in that moment and allowing your body and your mind and things to open, because that's where the best creativity happens. But I think we tend to stifle ourselves with our thoughts and judgment and criticizing things. It's too easy to do that. And so the practice of yoga and meditation combined with it helps give us tools, step back and just let it happen.
This is more of a technical question, but you say that these courses include yoga poses, mindfulness, and meditation practices, and some other things. But what I wondered was, do you have a differentiation for mindfulness and meditation, or are they pretty much the same thing to you?
I think that mindfulness, of course, is a form of meditation, but I think they're different. I mean, mindfulness is a type of meditation. So we might, when we really work with the senses, we might do a mindful eating practice or tuning out sensory detail through the eyes, all that input we get, and close the eyes and get into textures and just feeling the body and the practice without the eyes. And I would say that's mindfulness practice. But meditation comes in other forms. I mean, there's guided meditations where there's images and there's things that are being given, and there's tense and release practices for meditation. So I think meditation is kind of the umbrella of whole host of practices, and mindfulness is a form of meditation.
I've just had people say, no, they're the same thing. It's just what you want to call them. And I find, at least in my experience, that they are different, but that's okay. You can, and there are no fast rules here. I was just wondering what your definition was, because it's just, I think they're used so much interchangeably, and I think they aren't the same to me, but I can see where they might be for other people. So I'm just exploring what everybody thinks about it, kind of more or less.
Right. And in some ways, I don't know if mindfulness has kind of become the popular and more accessible term to meditation. If the word meditation can sometimes be a little more looming, or how do I go about starting that? And then mindfulness has been broken down and really used in pop culture a lot. I think maybe it makes it a little more accessible, but I do see them as different things. Mindfulness and meditation. Yeah.
I think some ways meditation outside of the yoga community can be a little overwhelming and very almost scary sometimes, whereas mindfulness isn't that, doesn't have that connotation. You may be right. Just the word is an easier one for people to consume, shall we say. You say that you have you're developing a new online course for June of this year, the 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that? I mean, I noticed that you take people it is a gentle yoga, which is, I can understand, but do you go through asanas and things like that? Or is it more of the mindfulness, breath, meditation kinds of things?
We definitely do yoga. We definitely do movement. I think movement is a key component in getting to know ourselves, opening the body, and linking breath and movement. That's yoga. And I see that's what really opens us up to our creativity. So there's definitely yoga practices. Every week's a little different depending on which chakra we're opening up that week and what we're working on. But I come from a background where I had a car accident. I've had severe migraines. I had a head injury. I've dealt with a lot of pain. I have a gentle yoga certification. I teach at a studio for 50 plus. So I think I'm very aware when I teach of different bodies, different injuries, that everyone who's coming to the mat is different and every day is different, right? I mean, maybe you were able to do balance poses the day before, but the next day you're off. And so it's meeting the students where they're at and teaching them to meet themselves where they're at. So I don't do full sun salutations. I don't do really intense asana practices, but I love somatic yoga that gets into the fascia, really gentle movements just linked with breath because it's a process of exploring. And then restorative practices, like true restorative, where we're using props and the muscles aren't working, we're letting everything go to really get into the nervous system.
Are you concerned about people who've never done yoga doing these asanas, even though they sound very gentle, that they're not quite in tune with their body enough to know what it could and couldn't do?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that, when I teach a regular weekly class in a studio, you have people from all walks of life. And I have people every class that come in who it may be their very first yoga class or their first time trying this type of yoga. And I think as long as you give the correct cues and you ask of the students to be in tune with their body, that they're able to go through the practices without having that background before. So
you're giving them lots of permission to do or not to do the poses, or to do them in a way that's good for them.
Right. And I think that, to me, that's where yoga is beautiful, that you can go to a class, and this is just the type of yoga classes that I love, is that, there's a teacher leading, but you also have to be your own teacher, right? I mean, the teacher's just the guide. And so your body is teaching you what's okay in that moment. And so it's the process of opening up and listening to breath and body to see what the body is capable of that day.
I like that. That's it. We've done some asanas. You're working through a chakra sequence in these 6 weeks, and you're using breath and meditation and mindfulness. Now, where does that connect to what are you doing in these classes to enhance or open up to creativity?
I'm thinking how to like walk you through kind of a class. I think it's kind of how we move from the beginning. And I see that yoga, the word yoga means discipline. And really, as a writer or an artist, you need discipline too. It's just another practice. And so the way that we approach yoga, I like to start every yoga class with an intention. So each Yoga for Writers class starts with a specific intention that applies to what we're learning and what we're doing in that week's class. We work with mantra, we work with intention, because that's going to go over to the writing. We do a meditation and an arrival in the beginning of every class where you're arriving in your body, you're checking in, you're open to what's happening in it, you're listening, and that's setting the stage for the class. We have different journal prompts throughout the class that relate to what the movement did. And oftentimes we go through poses and the yoga class itself, and then we have the prompts and different things come up. I'm trying to go back to your question. Now I think I've lost what you asked me.
No, I think you did fine. You did fine. Would you say that your creativity classes to open up to creativity are going to attract a different kind of student than the regular students that you teach in studios or privately?
I don't think so. I mean, I have had some people take the classes who had taken, just regular writing classes with me, courses for landscape writing and different things like that. And there wasn't yoga involved, and they were kind of leery and wondering because yoga wasn't their thing, or, meditation seemed a little looming or scary. So I have had students who came into the classroom through a writing background, interested how it could open it up, who hadn't been in yoga classes before. But, I think really it's any person who's interested in opening their creativity. And so that may be someone who's been practicing yoga for a while, or it may be someone who, wants to write more, create more, and is hitting a lot of blocks and wants to explore that through the body to see what opens.
Where did this idea come from? I mean, I know you said that when you did your own yoga, you noticed that the creativity was enhanced. Is that basically the reason you decided to share this with other creatives, shall we call them?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot that went into it. I mean, after a car accident and I had a head injury, the type of yoga that I had been doing, which was more of a power yoga, just kind of going to yoga for like working out and getting that from it, was no longer accessible. And then on the other hand, my writing and what I knew from my writing practices and how I organized things and how I approached things, because I had a lot of cognitive issues that I needed to work through, that was completely scattered and different. And it was kind of like, well, I mean, my body is still capable of moving. I'm still capable of writing, but these things that worked in the past aren't going to work anymore. So how do I make these things accessible? And so it was the exploration of the really gentle practices. And I like to call it, having a somatic conversation, having a chat with your body, where you're tuning in and listening. And it can be really tough to slow down. And with that said, it became kind of a process of I have a master's in creative writing. And sometimes when you go through so much school, it can be tough to like go back to the beginning and say, well, what are the tools and things you really need in the beginning to write and be creative and make that a practice? So in some ways, I feel like the injury helped me go back to the beginning and really explore creativity and being vulnerable and having a writing practice. In the beginning, it was just me exploring and figuring out how to get back into writing and yoga. And then it became something that it was like, you know what, it's not just me. These things really speak to each other and inform each other. And it's really an amazing experience that you can have on the mat, and that's reflected on the page.
You said that you had a rather serious, it sounds like, car accident, and which resulted in a head injury. And I noticed that you also have created a yoga program for people with migraines. And how is that different from this, we'll call it the writing program? They kind of go together if you're having migraines. I had a student who had migraines, and I was rather amazed at how intrusive it was. I mean, her balance was bad. She couldn't think. She actually had physical symptoms of, red eyes and all of this kind of stuff. So it was really quite serious. I've never had a migraine, so I didn't have my own experience to go to, but how are you using yoga to help people with migraines? Because it's really very serious. I was amazed at how awful it was, really.
No, it's, I didn't have them before the head injury. They were almost to the point that it was almost like a daily migraine. I mean, I was really pretty much incapacitated with migraines, and they're not, it's difficult because it's not just a headache. It's a whole nother animal. Like you said, and there's a whole barrage of symptoms with it. So, I have a specific program that's just for migraines, and part of it, there's a whole section that's just kind of lecture and education, because there's 4 stages to a migraine. It's understanding, what happens in the early stages. And if you know your particular symptoms and things that kind of start happening, and they can start slow, if you recognize them and you know your triggers, then we can really use the more natural things to help these type of headaches. We can do a restorative pose that's going to be more of a prescriptive pose to help the migraine not go full force or last a couple days. Part of it's about education. And then the other part of it is, I feel with migraines, you're kind of, in my experience and in other people who have severe migraines, it's a community that, exercise of any form can be really difficult. I could no longer go out and take a run because it would trigger a migraine. I could no longer just go to any yoga class because it would trigger a migraine. I think to a lot of people with migraines, they're dealing with chronic pain, and to go to a yoga class, it can be a little daunting. Basically, we're working on really, really gentle movements. And I talk about it in the same way for the Yoga for Writers, as far as I just see it as having a conversation with your body. And when you move a little and you breathe with that movement, and then you wait to find the feedback. So was there tension there? Was it tighter? Was there pain? And what was the quality of it? It's really about slowing down and understanding that if you take that time to talk to your body, then you get feedback. So we start slow. We start with that. And then the poses that I've chosen for the program are all gentle. But when we do the gentle sequence, it's really focusing on posture and structural alignment. Migraines are neurological, but there's plenty of things that trigger them and make them worse. And poor posture and muscle tension is one of them. So those are definitely things we can work with in yoga. Poor sleep and hormone imbalance are problems too. And that's where I see the restorative yoga coming in. And that's a very powerful practice. And they've done studies showing that people with migraines who practice restorative yoga a couple times a week, it's really, really decreased their migraines.
Wonderful. Now, is this an online course, or is this something you do in the studios or privately?
I've done it live in studios, and I do teach it privately, but it is an online course that can be purchased. Videos are online.
Okay, great. I think that's really a service. Like I said, I had this person I knew, and the migraines just destroyed the days that she had them. So they're really intense. And so I think it'd be great if they knew that this was available to them. I'm going to give people your contact details and your website and all of that kind of stuff. But is there anything that you would like to add that you don't think that we've covered or that we didn't cover sufficiently?
Gosh, I think, it was just wonderful talking to you. I think, both these things, they're such small things. And, yoga for people who suffer from migraines and have the chronic pain for it. It's just, getting the word out there and to them. And the same with people who are interested in opening up their creativity. I just think yoga is such a beautiful practice. And I mean, I like to tell people when they're worried about doing yoga that, you know, you're breathing. And if you can breathe, you can do yoga. I mean, in the simplest definition, you know, if all you can do is go to your mat and sit there and find a tall spine and be with your breath, then you're doing yoga. And there's a lot of self-care there, and there's a lot of healing there, and a lot of benefits.
Yes, I agree with you. That's a beautiful way to say it. If you would like to contact Courtney, her email address is c.amberkilian, and it's KILIAN @gmail.com. And her website is, I love this, www.om-and-inc.com. And I've looked at that, and it's really an interesting website to look at it and put those things of creativity and yoga together. I think that's great. Her Facebook is om.inc.inspired, and she has a newsletter if you'd like to sign up for that on her website. And she's also got Instagram and all that, and I'll put those in the show notes. But she also has the Yoga for Migraines, which is http://om-and-inc, which is all one word, .com/video-and-e-book. And I think that if you have migraines or you know someone that has a migraine, this might be a great help to them. So if you're either looking for some more creativity or you would like some help with migraines, I think Courtney, with her own experience, has really some wonderful ideas and products that might be very useful to you. I congratulate you because I think this is a really, well, we've kind of overdone the creativity word, but I think it's really a creative way of looking at yoga and applying it to people that perhaps we haven't thought of doing before.
Wonderful. Well, it was so nice talking to you. I really appreciate the time, and I've loved listening to your cast. So I'm humbled to be among the ranks of the other people you've interviewed.
Oh, I think you've done wonderfully. I think you've brought something really new and different, and that's always good in a sense of yoga, but also for information that yoga has a lot of capabilities, and this one isn't one that I would have thought of, but I think it's really a great one. So thank you, Courtney. I really appreciated talking to you. I thought you explained it very well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you for that wonderful interview. If you would like to be a guest on Changing the Face of Yoga, please go to my website, www.yogalightness.com.au, and under the Changing the Face of Yoga tab, you can complete Be Our Guest form. After reviewing the form and finding it applicable to this podcast, we will send you a link to schedule an interview. Please download, review, and tell your friends of any podcasts that are of interest to you and to them. If you would like to contact me, send an email to info@yogalightness.com.au. And thank you for listening to Changing the Face of Yoga.